Hi, everybody. Welcome back to another story submission today. Today we have Tammy. Tammy, I'm so happy that you're here with us today. And I'm just going to hand it off to you for you to introduce yourself and tell us your story.
Okay, thanks, Amanda. My name is Tammy. I'm a college instructor who came to counseling a little late in life. And I came because it literally started with my daughter, who's 21 years old, and I had postpartum, and nobody asked me the right questions. And the idea of how I didn't connect with my daughter and the guilt I felt just really wrecked me. And I didn't get to work on it until literally 10 years later when an accident brought me with depression to a counselor. And what opened up for that for me was how the guilt and shame I had felt as an inadequate mom informed so much of the rest of my life. And that counselor helped me pull that stuff apart and start to understand that it was a chemical imbalance that began that road, that it wasn't me, that I wasn't inadequate as a parent, that I was enough as I was, and that I had something to offer. And finally, I had, like I said, I had the accident, and I started to realize that what I wanted for a legacy for myself was not something big. I wanted something small but meaningful. And I came to my own counseling before I started this program because I wanted to make sure I was in the right headspace. And I found a trauma specialist who brought me back to 3 different events that had switched my path very severely. And I was internalizing stuff. And we used a great deal of somatic work, body exploration, looking at how I saw myself in the world through other people's eyes, and finally EDMR to settle the ghosts that had haunted me for over 20 years. So having that experience, I had hemmed and hawed about returning to school at 49 years of age. And through a really great counselor sharing his experience as a counselor, plus letting me see real success, it felt like the right decision. And long road, doing a degree through COVID, I'm almost done.
Thanks, Tammy. I appreciate that. Can you take us back to your earlier years and tell us about what life was like when you were a new mom or even before that? And I know a little bit about your history,
Yeah,
but I'd love for you to talk about what your lived experience was like
yeah.
way back when, and then we'll come back to this.
Okay. Um, I think I did my life a little differently than some people. I met my husband when I was 19. He was 6 years older. And it made sense to get married young. I was 21, but 6 weeks after my 21st birthday, because I didn't want to get married till I could legally drink everywhere in the world. I know, what a great rationale, hey? Um, and it wasn't that the marriage was a mistake from the start, but I think we got married too soon. But that was what you did back then. You fell in love, you bought a house, you got married, and then you have a baby. And very quickly after I was married, we moved provinces, and he basically had to leave the country for work. And I became a single mom at 24. And that was devastatingly lonely. And I went through that marriage becoming more and more detached as a human because that was how I was surviving. And I spent enormous amount of time with my son. I was a good mom to him. I was a single mom, but I isolated, and I spent an enormous amount of time trying to figure out what my place in the world was. And actually, it's come to me pretty recently that what I have figured out is that I used education as my comfort because I couldn't control so much of my world because my husband traveled. I was dependent on his income. It didn't dawn on me to say being a single mom at 24 and living under someone else's rules was okay. Um, I was a long time in the marriage before I realized that I was being gaslit, and unpacking that is still something that I'm working on. And um, as most recently as a couple of weeks ago, he tried to turn around in a civil conversation and then say that the divorce was not what he wanted, that he never wanted the marriage to end. And that stuff is the lived experience that makes me aware of what it is to be in a relationship that's no longer healthy for you, to be a single mom, financially struggling. Those things all impact your decisions. The voices of what you think society wants for you versus what you need for yourself tormented me for a very long time because I thought there was a way to do things. And I mean, therapy is not new. I started not sleeping when my son was 2 years old. And I woke up, I smoked at the time. I don't anymore, I haven't smoked for 20 years. And I woke up, we lived in an apartment. As the door was closing behind me, it hit me on the ass, and it was an automatic locking door. I had gotten up in the night, slept walk, lit a cigarette, and I didn't smoke in my apartment. And I was going outside with an automatic locking door with my 2-year-old inside. So that drove me to counseling, going, what in the hell is going on? And what we came down to is, it seems so simple now. He looked at me after probably the third or fourth session and he said, can you say I'm not perfect? It took me 6 weeks to get those words out of my mouth because I had set up such impossible standards for myself. And I think that's one of the things that's the hardest is we see television, we read books, and we see these women who seem to have it all and they don't have moments of weakness. And I thought that's what I was supposed to be, is I was supposed to cook the dinner, study, get A's, raise a happy child, be socially acceptable, and 122 other things. And I was dying inside. I had no idea what I wanted. What I knew was I was good at school and I was good at being there for my kid. And everything else, I just felt like I was a failure at.
Tammy, can you tell us what gaslighting means from your lived experience?
Yeah, absolutely. Gaslighting, in my experience, um, he may argue that it was unintentional, but I would turn around and say, we made plans to do laundry today. So I've got everything ready to go. And he'd come in and go, no, we're going to brunch. And I go, no, no, no. We said last night we were doing laundry. I never had that conversation with you. And you kind of sit there and go, wait, no. And I would completely, and I'd go out and I'd look and the laundry is there. And I'd go, but the laundry's sorted. We said we were doing that today. And it would be, you may have decided that, but we never talked about it. So you start to wonder if you had that conversation. And in my experience, because I spent so much time alone or disconnected from that life, because I would only see him for a week, a month, otherwise he was traveling, that obviously I had gotten it wrong, because why would he say that to me? So what I ended up doing was believing that I was the one who was not paying attention. I was the one who was not doing the right things for the children. I was the one who was not doing the budgeting right. I'd turn around and pay all the bills and I'd go, I don't understand. I'm down a sum of money. And he'd look at me and go, but I don't spend money. It has to be you. And I would go back and I would spend hours going back over my budgets, going back over my bank statements. And this is before it was electronic. I'd reorder bank statements in case I had missed something, double checking, becoming incredibly paranoid about dropping the ball. And then you just feel like you're not measuring up to what a 25, 35-year-old woman is supposed to be.
Gaslighting is extremely difficult to experience because what I'm hearing you say is you felt crazy in your life. You would think that or know that there was a conversation that happened, and then he would say, "No, that didn't happen," or you would know that you did something accurately in a certain way, and then he would say, "Oh, no, you didn't do that," or "I did that," or it was really a way for him to discredit your reality, your lived experience, so that you would then question if what you were experiencing was accurate, even though somewhere deep down inside, it seems like you knew that it was accurate. You knew
Yeah,
you had these conversations. You knew these things were true that you were saying,
yeah.
but he would tell you they weren't. And because he was your partner, you trusted him and you wanted to make sure that you were doing everything right. You would second guess yourself and then you would get down on yourself, even though some niggly voice inside knew that you were right. Tell us about that little voice.
Um, I spent a lot of time telling it to be quiet because he chose me. Um, I had a whole lot of self-esteem issues when I was younger. So this older guy who had a car, the ability to um, buy a house, and who literally looked at me, unlike most of the guys my age, and said, of course you want to go to university. Of course you want to be a lawyer. So if someone loved me like that, why would I question it? So it was literally me going, oh, you're overrun. I told myself it was because I was spending too much time with my kids and not enough time with other things. And you just continuously come up with excuses because your head won't process that this person would do anything to damn you. Because if they loved you, they'd give you the space to go, oh, I screwed up. But he never took ownership of anything that went wrong. It was always on me. And he'd literally do the thing of, well, you sort it out. I'll be over here whenever you're ready. So it seemed like he was giving me space to figure out where I'd gone wrong. So that little voice died so hard. And it has taken the birth of my daughter and her power for me to literally go, no more, and for that voice to find its way again, because it was dead. It was under 100 quilts and a dozen things, and the end of my marriage was coming because he just wanted to be friends. He didn't want any affection. He wanted separate bedrooms. And as long as I was there, I could have control of the money. He would decide if he wanted to go on vacation, and I could live an independent life. I was 47 years old. I had never been with anyone else, not really. So I kind of looked at it and went, what about an open marriage? Like, just trying to figure out, where am I going to get affection? And I was talking one day with my daughter, who was 14 at the time, and she said, Mom, it's time. And I went, excuse me? She said, it's time for you to leave Dad. She said, I know you're thinking about it. She said, you deserve to be loved as you love. My 14-year-old got it. And that's when that voice woke up and went, holy shit, you've done something right because she's got a voice. Now find your own. It's not easy to walk out of a marriage when you've been with someone since you were 19. We were together 28 years when I walked away, married 25.
It's an incredible strength to walk away after that amount of time, right? And I'm curious, for those who are listening and are experiencing gaslighting and are questioning themselves and everything that they're doing,
Mm-hmm.
but they hear that little voice and they're stifling that little voice, do you have a message for them?
Go for a big walk in the woods and listen to yourself. Get away from the noise that defines you and get help. It is so important. A good counselor got me through this. I didn't do this on my own. My daughter drove me to get help, and I got good help. But I also learned to be quiet with myself after that, to go, what's there? And I looked at what I wanted my future to be, what I wanted my impression to be. So figure out if where you are is feeding that soul or if it's suppressing it, because that little voice is your soul. And it can be suppressed by a dozen different people in a dozen different ways. But when you get quiet, it shows up. I always found the little voice showed up when I had PMS. that's when my personal truth for some reason would show up. Like there was a hormonal connection for me, but get to a quiet spot and talk to yourself, talk out loud to yourself, question why all of a sudden this is showing up again. Because that's when I started to remove the layers of stuff that I had just stuffed on top of it, because that's what I had to do to think that I was enough for him. I was enough, but I was too much for him. And he didn't like it, so he tried to annihilate the world that I knew. And whether he realizes he did it or not, it doesn't matter, because that's what happened. And you will never get what people define on TV as justice. You have to be settled in yourself. The person who's gaslit you won't take ownership of it. And that's huge, that you have to be satisfied in yourself.
When you decided to go to counseling after your daughter pointed out what you already knew,
Yeah.
right?
Mm.
And you started to go and get help. Can you tell us about that process and what it was like for you to endeavor to leave this marriage after so long?
I think the hardest thing for me was that silence that counselors give you, because I had spent so much of my life thinking I was supposed to have the answer, because if I didn't have the answer prepared, I was wrong. And then you sit there, and sometimes it's a case of the counselor asks a question and nothing comes. And what was hard was letting myself be vulnerable enough to ask that voice. And we did some work in relation to remembering a time when I did feel different, when I didn't feel the weight of the world on my shoulders. I didn't feel empty inside. And I had to go back a really long way. And that is hard when you start to realize, because for me, I have two beautiful children and I've had an amazing life. But the authentic me wasn't there. So finding her again was what those conversations were about. And I had to go back to my teen years to find parts of that. Does that make sense?
It does. I'm interested to hear more about what that meant for you, like finding your authentic self and how you realized that you had lost touch with it in the first place.
It actually happened all in the flip for me happened in one session. And the counselor had asked me to imagine a place that I felt very safe and I quite enjoyed. And I envisioned the restaurant at our local museum. And he said, now put yourself in a spot there where you feel safe. He said, there's a bunch of people coming up to the door, and they're all versions of you. Who's showing up? And he said, there might be more than you can count. And I had 3 show up. I had myself at 7 or 8. I had myself at 17. And I had myself at 32, which are really strange numbers, I know. But there was trauma attached to the first 2 that I dealt with afterwards. And the 32-year-old was the first, it was an image of myself from a black and white picture that was taken the day of my birthday, because the next day I was taking my dream vacation with my kids and my husband. And what was really interesting is that the 32-year-old was just kind of standing there going, you've done good. But the other 2 were protecting each other and having that conversation about letting the 3 of them come and talk to me was kind of mind-blowing, because I realized that some of my life views had been informed by early bullying and by honestly a volleyball coach who was appropriate. There wasn't nothing like that, but he had told me as long as I worked hard, I would always be successful. And I had worked incredibly hard, and he had been awarded the position of coach for the provincial team. And after 3 years of 25 hours a week of practice, I got dropped and my world fell apart because I had lost the social group I'd had most of my life. I had to give up for that sport. So at 17, I stood alone. And it was the first time where I was taken advantage of by a guy. And it was a dating thing, but I realized that, yeah, I was probably a bit too naive. And because this coach had informed my experience, I had no idea how to be in relationships. And that's what this had informed as 17 were times when I should have been forming social relationships and I withdrew as a person. And at 32, I had finally arrived at what I had defined in my head as success. But here I was now at 48, and I had blown up my whole world.
Would you say, Tammy, that at 48, when you blew up your whole world, as you say,
Yeah,
that you were actually closer to being your in line with your authentic self than you had been at any point for your whole life previous to that?
that's it. Exactly. Yeah, I'm sorry if I got lost in that, but that's kind of the point, is that at that moment, I realized that I had been changing faces, changing masks in order to survive, in order to function. And in meeting those three people together, or those three selves together, sorry, I found me, because me was the kid below the 7-year-old.
Yeah. Okay. Just thinking about my next question.
Mm. Is that too long? Was that too long
No,
an
no,
answer? Okay.
no. That's great.
Okay.
Um, just thinking about more about the authentic self, and yeah. So I have a thought that when we're bopping along in our lives and things seem to be going well, and like when you were 32, you're like, this is success, right?
Yeah.
Even though you were in a relationship that was not supportive to
Yeah.
you, right?
Yeah.
And so the message there is life can look good, but we can be totally apart from our authentic self in those moments.
Yeah.
So from the outward lens of our life, it's like, oh, I have success, and this is what life is supposed to be. This is what having a family is supposed to be. And at the same time, there's a disconnect to self where it's almost like there's a lost self somewhere that our successful self in that moment,
Yeah.
we push it away. We're like, oh, do you have something negative to say? Because I don't want to hear it. Because I'm doing well over here. So you're
I
just
am
gonna
now the
go
post. I am now the
like,
poster child. I was the poster child for the girl who had been a screw up. I had a really good job teaching in an Irish school. I had two beautiful children. We could afford to go on a 3-week vacation. How could I possibly not be happy? I had a husband who did all the right things. He had a great job. But if you look at that birthday picture, the smile is so fake. And I think that's the reason it shows up. As I look at that, and that woman is just going, it's all here. See, I'm doing all the right things. But I wasn't me. I was a very filtered, masked person who was doing all the right things. And yeah, you're right. Authentic was over here somewhere, and I didn't even know how to reach her.
would you mind to send me that picture
Yeah,
if you could find it so I can splice it in while
I
you're
actually know
talking about
where
her?
it, yep, I know where it is. And it's because my son loves the picture. Because that year they had made my whole birthday. That was the first time that he was allowed to make my birthday. So he made my cupcakes and he helped make my dinner and all
Aw.
that stuff. So there is a beautiful memory attached to it. But I have that picture and I've never gotten rid of it. And I don't know why, but every time I look at it, I don't smile. I look at it and go, yeah, her.
Hmm. That
And
disconnect
that
is so
disconnect.
clear, right?
Yeah,
And isn't it amazing to look back now at the age you are now and look back and go, wow, how lost was I? And even though I knew it, I didn't pay attention to it,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
You survived it.
I did survive it. Um, and the sad part is that what I did is I kept throwing myself into my fundamental self knew it was missing. And every time it came up, I found another project to make myself check a good girl box. I love creating. I never ever would have gone into being a costume designer because that was incredibly impractical. I ever win the lottery, I'm quitting all this and I'm going to go make ballet costumes. I swear to God. There are not enough sparkles on the planet as far as I'm concerned. Um, but I became the costume mistress at a school musical. I was in charge of, we're talking about a musical with 60 kids in it. I would make a minimum of 60 costumes. One year, 210 in 3 months. I was working part-time. I wanted full-time in Ireland. So while I had a 2-year-old, I did my first distance degree through University of Waterloo to prove I could. I didn't cut my hours. I managed, I literally would go to work in the morning. I would pick my daughter up at 2 o'clock. I would come home. I would do the housework. I would make the dinner. And we would go for a walk after supper for a half hour to make sure I got family time. And my husband would do the bath. And I would hit the books at 8 o'clock from 8 until midnight. And then I would go to bed and rinse and repeat. And the only responsibility I put on my husband ever was, if you want me to spend a day with you on the weekends, I need you guys to plan it. I need you to grocery shop for it, or I'm going to spend the day in my books. And so every second Saturday they would pack a picnic and we would hike. So to the outside world, I've got this really great job in a beautiful school. I'm the costume mistress. I have professional friends. We socialize with my husband's coworkers. My daughter is happy. My son is in school. How could I not be satisfied? But no matter what I did, it still felt like it wasn't enough. So that's how you know you're hiding from your own unhappiness, your own disconnect. Because I kept on trying to fill a hole with external validation.
Yeah, I was going to ask you if you have, let me start that again. I was going to ask you if you have a message for those who are listening who are flowing along in their lives, but know there's something missing and are pushing this authentic self away and don't really know how to live otherwise. Do you have a message for them?
It's the hardest thing you'll ever do, to look yourself in the mirror and decide to say no to something. The second you say no to something, you start to realize you're living for yourself.
My daughter's having a meltdown right outside the door. I'm gonna have to, I don't know if you can hear her screaming. I'm gonna have to cut this
No,
out. You can't hear her screaming.
no, not a
My
sound, just your
my
voice.
wife is like trying to drag her away. Like, be quiet, be quiet. She knows we're recording. Um, okay. Can you tell us more about the journey of leaving your husband and if you changed your mind throughout that process, if there was a back and forth, and how you finally got to the place where you did officially leave and that was it?
The first time I left my husband, my son was 7 years old. My son is 30 now. Um, Long story short, he had lost his job. I did the wifely thing and followed him into his sadness. And looked for a job the whole 9 yards. I got into education, and I said, we were living in a rural area. I said, I'm not living in rural. I'm going in and doing teaching. Are you coming with me? Because he was living in a family home. He said, no, I'm going to stay here. I said, okay, we're done. And I left. And he didn't want to take our son at all. And that kind of confused me. And he did the thing of, well, I know what we now call it mama bear. I don't know what he called it at the time. I wouldn't dare take the child from you. I said, you could take him on the weekend so I can get some schoolwork done. And there was such a change in him after I wasn't around for a few months that I thought it was me, that I was just too much for him. So still that gaslighting. And I agreed to go back to dating. And the last 2 months of my education degree, so we were separated at that point for about 9 months, he got a job offer to go to Ireland. And I basically said, he asked me to go with him. And I said, look, I'll go if you promise me a return ticket and support payments for Nick if I don't want to stay after 6 months. And what I now know is for my ex-husband, whenever something is new, he puts all of his energy into it. So what I thought was energy into us was him into a new job, a new location, a new life. But I did stay, and we went on to have another child. When this came this time, I was done. And I knew that I couldn't do what I had done 20 years before. So I sat down and literally looked at a budget of what I made. I asked my daughter if she wanted to be with me full time or if she wanted to split time with her dad, because she was old enough. She knew this was coming. She said, I'd prefer to live with you, but of course I'll spend time with dad. I said, okay. I did up a budget and I told him I was done. Actually, what happened before that is I wanted to have a conversation without the children. And this was Christmas time. He was working out of the country. And I gave my mother one of her bucket list items, which was to have all of her grandchildren together for Christmas, and I didn't go. And I was prepared to reconcile the marriage over Christmas. And he didn't book a ticket home until the 18th of December. I had made these arrangements in October, knowing that we would have 10 days over Christmas, because whenever we had time off, we always found our way back together. So I thought if I just had him to myself and not the pressure of all the stuff that came with Christmas, that we'd find each other again. And he didn't book a ticket home. He wasn't excited at the idea of just the two of us for the first time in over 20 years to have Christmas together. And that hurt me to a core that I never knew I had. I felt completely and totally rejected. And that rejection fueled my determination to have the really honest conversation of, this is not what I want. And unless you're willing to discuss something like an open marriage, because we were good friends, but I needed affection, I needed attention, and he didn't want to give it. He was very happy with his life in the Middle East and seeing me for 90 days a year and talking to me twice a week. So by the time he was gone back at Christmas, it had been decided we were done. He refused to tell his family. I told my family. I waited for the kids to come home to tell them, because my son was 25. He wasn't a baby. My daughter was only, like I said, she was 15. And between December and March, I had communicated with him that I had a lawyer, that I sent him an email basically going, if you want to keep the costs down, here's what I expect. I basically gave myself an allowance of about $1 a day for the length of our marriage. And I had him buy me out. The house that we were in, he had been using to hold over my head for about 2 years. It wasn't sellable in the state it was because he had so many undone jobs. And I couldn't even have an assessor come in to find the value of it, because they'd say, I can't sell it. There's too many things undone. So he had been using that to put off my decision. And I went, that's it, enough. I'm leaving. I knew he would be home in June and I was going to be out by then. And I moved out the 1st of May. So between December and the 1st of May, we had lots of discussions about an amicable separation. The lawyer papers had been signed off without family influence because that's been a problem for the entire duration of our marriage, was family influence. And I cut ties. Now, it's been 5 years and I still struggle to be in the room with him. He can still undermine me faster than any other human in the world. So I have as little to do with him as possible.
Can you tell me about what your life is like now, post this separation that you've just described, and also you're in school to
Yeah.
become a counselor yourself. So
Yeah.
let's talk about that.
Um, I moved towns. I moved from a major city to a school that had over 2,000 students. I teach college, to a school with less than 300 because I wanted something where I could enjoy and not have as complicated a life. I lost 70 pounds with the help of some really great friends and a program. I won't deny that. And I've kept it off, which is something I've never done before. I've kept it off now for 6 years. So I choose to be involved with things now that bring me joy. I do a fair amount of volunteer work and not-for-profit work behind the scenes, because stewardship is something that's really important to me. And when I decided to leave, I decided the rest of my days, with or without another person, were going to be on my own terms. And that meant, while I adore my teaching, you can get burnt out from teaching. And I've been at it for almost 25 years. And I have really bad arthritis. And I wanted a career that would let me continue my life because I like traveling. I like meeting people. I like helping people. I get joy from seeing someone else benefit from something I've done. And counseling lined up quite nice with that. And the other thing is, with the advent of COVID, how was I going to have a career and still have flexibility in my life? Because there's no flexibility with teaching. And counseling gives me that. And I've been able to do my education, the degree program, and work full time. Now, it's not for everybody because my social life is weekends. I see my friends probably twice a month. I spend a fair amount of time with my daughter because she's in the house that I moved away from. But everything I do now, I do knowing that it's because it's the outcome I want, not because it's what I think someone else wants for me. In fact, I've had several family members that go, "Why are you doing another degree?" To which I go, "Because this actually brings me joy." But it's really cool to have people that have known me for a long time go, "You are so doing what you're supposed to be doing. You should have been doing this years ago." To have people see the authentic me before I saw it in myself has been huge, because I think the person who shows up in that therapy room with that other person, that is me, the person who really wants to hear someone's story and help alleviate their suffering. I can't fix them, but I can give them a safe space. And to know that I can be a safe space for someone when I didn't have it for a really long time, it's huge. It's everything.
There's no question, Tammy, that you are made for this work. Like, you just
Thank you.
have such a beautiful way of connecting with people and building that rapport and building trust, and bringing humor into your work. It's inspiring.
Thank you. I
Yeah.
appreciate that.
Um, Now that you have come into your authentic self, you're doing this counseling degree, you're living life on your own terms. I'm wondering, when you look back, do you have any regrets? Or is this exactly where you want to be now that you're here?
To have regrets is to regret some really amazing stories and journeys. Um, I don't know if I've told you this. I got to meet Nelson Mandela. I got to study at Oxford. You don't get to do stuff like that without the experience I had. That happened because my in-laws lent me the money to go. So while there was all this stuff that happened, I wouldn't be who I am now. Do I wish I could have showed up to her 10 years ago? Do I wish I was this at 43 instead of 53? Yeah, because our life is only so long. And to me, there's always more to learn. There's always more to do. And there's always more to appreciate. And I'm on a timeline. So at 43, to be who I am now would mean not having some of the other experiences. And that's unfortunate. I got to live in the Middle East and experience what it was like to live there. I got to teach in the Middle East. I got to teach grade 9 girls who had such closed visions and be just a seed of your life doesn't have to be what it is. So is there regret? There's sadness for some of the stuff, but no regret.
That's really a beautiful attitude. I think about the people who are watching who might be in a similar situation to where you were in
Mm-hmm.
your marriage, knowing that it's not where they want to be, really struggling, not sure how to leave, knowing that they probably need to leave for
Mm-hmm.
themselves, for their children, for their safety. And I'm wondering if you have a message for them.
I think you said regret. The one thing that I kind of regret is pride made me buy the house I bought. I could afford to buy a house, and I bought a house that's too big for me and my daughter. So if I had my time back and I was looking for courage, when you make the shift, don't try and automatically create a new life. Let yourself start small. Let yourself experience small successes. So plan a budget. Have a look at what one budget looks like and what your costs are going to be. And are you willing to scale your life to match that? Because trying to just create a whole, because that was, I think, my error for me was I tried to create a whole image of I was just going to move out of my marriage and I was going to look just as successful. So I bought a house that was too big and I can afford it, but I'm looking at going, I now got a big old house that I want to keep, so, and the stuff that went with it, like a neighborhood that has lawns that have to be cut constantly. And I put pressures on myself that I didn't need to do. And that's why the moving here to this apartment and to a job that had less stress let me become authentically me, because when I bought the house I bought an idea of you're not going to get me. And if I'd been honest with myself, I would have gone, what do I want in order for me to be able to have what makes me comfortable all the time? And that would have been a little bit less. So make sure when you're making your exit plan that it's for you and not to prove something to someone else, because that someone else doesn't even know you're trying to prove something to them.
Well said.
Thank you.
So we have a few minutes left, not long. And I'm wondering if you could pinpoint the most helpful three things that you received from counseling in all your time when you were in counseling, what would that be?
Learning I didn't have to be perfect, and that with that moving forward was the judgment I thought I was facing was my idea of what I was supposed to be, what roles my society, my culture had defined. Um, and probably that my past informed so much of my life that I wasn't even aware of. That there were things that I experienced that weren't healthy, that colored my perspective. But here's the really cool thing. I got to undo the damage in good therapy because I found out that my gut was right all along and that I was enough as I was.
Thank you, Tammy. And I'm also thinking, figuring out how to word this, trying to make it bite-sized, user-friendly for when we
Mm-hmm.
chop it up into clips.
Yeah.
Um, it might be a little bit of a loaded question, so it might not be a simple question. Just do your best.
We'll figure it out.
Okay. What are 3 steps that you would encourage others to take to get in touch with their authentic self?
I think the first thing you have to do is decide you're worth the work, because it is work. It doesn't just happen. You don't get to walk away. You don't get to just stop doing or start doing. You have to decide you're worth the work. You have to show up for those who inspire you. And it's okay to, I'm going to say, feed off of. It's okay to take their belief in you and use that until you start to believe in yourself. And I guess the biggest thing is be okay with yourself in the silence and find time for that silence, because what shows up when you're quiet enough with yourself will inspire, will bring forth. And it's small, it's so quiet and it's so small and it's not fast. That's the big thing, is that finding the authentic self isn't and snap, it's done. You're going to do something and go, oh man, you know what? I don't care if anybody knows I did this. It's enough that I did it. That's when you know you've had an authentic self moment. It doesn't matter if anyone else knows. And the best example I can give is when I did this degree, I no longer needed to tell anyone what I got in papers. I was just satisfied that I'd done my best and knew my best was enough.
Well said.
Thank
So
you.
now that we're wrapping up here,
Yep.
do you have anything in closing that you'd like to say to anyone who's listening?
I think one of the things that we suffer in Canada in particular, or in North America about right now, is we see mental health issues as almost trendy, because we've gone from not talking about it to celebrities embracing it. And if you think you have a mental health challenge, take the time to talk to the people who are educated. Educate yourself and know that you're not alone. And you might not have a mental health issue, but you may need someone to talk to who's not judgmental and doesn't know all your history. And that's where therapy gave me clarity, because I didn't need someone who knew who my dad was, who knew who my sisters were. I just needed it for me. And I think when you talk about mental health and needing support or not needing support, forget what you see in the media, educate yourself, have the conversation with your doctor, reach out to mental health providers and talk to the provider. Don't just go, this is who it is. This is who I've got. That's it. Make sure it's someone that you can form a trust bond with, because without that trust bond, you're not going to get what you need from the therapeutic process. And not everyone's a good match, and that's okay.
That's beautiful.
Thank you.
Well, Tammy, on behalf of myself and this agency and anyone out there who might benefit from anything that you said, thank you so much for being brave and putting yourself out there and talking about your life and the things you've learned, the struggles that you've triumphed through. And there's no question you are a survivor and a
Thank
thriver.
you. Thanks.
Right? And it's just been an honor to know you and work with you.
Thank you so
So,
much.
so I'm really grateful. Thank you, Tammy.
You're welcome. My pleasure.
I'm just